Shall we start, sir?
Yeah, sure. Just skip. Is the video on now?
Yes, sir.
Right.
Perfectly okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Good evening, one and all. I heartily welcome all of you in the sequel of historical and pioneering Langlet's online lecture series. At the outset, we, the team of Langlet, need to thank all the participants for your unconditional love, words of appreciations, blessings, academic support, and overwhelming response. Most of us are the part of this historical journey by your active participation or as the speaker on this platform. As you know, the basic motive of this lecture series is to share knowledge and learn from experts. It started well back on 20th April 2020, and now we have reached to the milestone by conducting more than 60 sessions of well-known national and international academicians who have delivered their scholarly, informative, and thought-provoking talks on various aspects of language, literature, criticism, ICT, e-content, and effect of COVID-19 on higher education. I must thank you all for your active participation and regular attendance. It proves that you have a quest for knowledge in this pandemic COVID-19 situation too. Even though we are locked down, we are not down. Langley's platform provided a one of its kind in mutual teaching learning experience. It's a free to learn from the expert, no registration is required, and that's why reached to a total 45 views on YouTube channel till today and more than 2,200 teachers, academicians, poets, critics of various universities and colleges across India, and more importantly, students and research scholars are benefited by this lecture series. In addition to that, it's not the end of the lecture series, just a new beginning. We will arrange such lecture series, national and international level webinars as per the availability of the internationally acclaimed speakers every now and then. Friends, today we have with us a well-known, internationally acclaimed academician, Professor Amrit Sen, sir. He is presently professor and head Department of English at Vishwa Bharati uh, Santiniketan. He is interested in 18th century studies, travel writing, Tagore studies, and the history of science. Some of his major publications and edited volumes include Gitanjali, the Century Edition, Rabindranath Tagore, the Unsung Hero, Rabindranath Tagore and his Circle, Santiniketan for Visitors, the Bengali Chemist, Acharya Prafulla Chandra Ray and Post-Coloniality, and uh, Basundhara, Rabindranath Tagore and the Environment. Apart from his academic engagement, he has also translated and performed in Tagore's dance dramas at national and international programs. He is presently also joint editor of the Vishwa Bharati Quarterly. Among his major awards, he has won the Outstanding Thesis Award by the Government of India, the Research Award by the UGC, the Oxford 18th Century Bursary, and a host of academic recognitions. He has traveled extensively as a project coordinator for the Ukeri Award to Edinburgh, Scotland, as invited speaker to the University of Oxford and uh, I think Shanghai University, China, as he has also delivered the Tagore Memorial Lecture at Rabindranath Tagore Center under the Mahatma Gandhi Institute of Mauritius. Professor Amrit Sen sir is also presently officiating as the director of Granthana Vibhag, the publication wing of Vishwa Bharati since July 2018. So without further delay, as we can see, webinar room is full of enthusiastic participants and quest for knowledge learners. Let me invite Professor Amrit Sen sir, uh, Professor and Head Department of English at Vishwabharati Santiniketan, to deliver his talk on of identities and national anthems, the case of Rabindranath Tagore. Over to you, sir.
Right. A very warm and warm greetings to all of you. A very good evening to all of you, rather. Thank you, Prashant, and thank you to the Langlit Society for allowing me this opportunity to make a presentation before you. What I'll do today is talk about, and just give me a moment to share the screen so that,
Okay.
you know, I can then do this properly. Right. Just a second. Right. Is the screen shared now?
Yes, sir.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Mothe, for this opportunity of presenting my ideas to a wide segment of the intellectuals and the people at large. I will today speak on something which is very close to all of us, really, the national anthem of India and the national anthem of Bangladesh. And I've titled my presentation as Of Identities and National Anthems, the case of Rabindranath Tagore. And as you can see in the background, one of the pictures of Rabindranath, it's not really seen by all and sundry, during the time in which he was actually writing the national anthem of Bangladesh, Amar Sonar Bangla. So why do I choose this topic today when our country is facing a very militant form of nationalism, and when certain ideas are being called into contestation almost on a daily basis? It's a way of understanding how Tagore conceived of these songs and what he would have probably felt about the courses that our different nations have taken today. So without further ado, let me launch into the paper. Right. What is a national anthem? That's the first question that I throw open before the floor. And let me think through what the national anthem actually does. Rooted in the collective conscience, it's an important parameter of defining national identity. So every single nation, as it were, has certain totems through which the defining ideas of that particular territory, that particular nationhood, is articulated. If that nation is that imagined community, and I'm using Benedict Anderson's framework here, the framework of that imagined identity is rooted in the salient vision that a national anthem encapsulates. So it's a way in which an entire nation articulates the way in which it perceives itself. Therefore, the national anthem is probably that singular statement that the nation makes in a certain way of gazing at its own navel. And the selection of the national anthem and the responses to it are therefore very important constituents of any national identity. And this is especially true of the South Asian subcontinent that has shared a history of incursions, colonialism, partition, and communal violence. I could have talked about a lot of other national anthems, but I choose to focus on South Asia principally because the question of the national anthem becomes extremely debated and extremely complex. What is my argument here? My argument is that Rabindranath remains the only individual to have composed the national anthems of two independent nations, India and Bangladesh. And as I'll point out at the conclusion of my lecture, that he also played an important role in the formulation of the national anthem of Sri Lanka. We'll take a very cursory look at the Sri Lankan national anthem, but my focus will be India and Bangladesh. And what am I going to theorize here? I'm going to look at the composition of these two songs and their nomination as national anthems, so the history of the songs, as it were. And I'm also going to posit the debates that have surrounded them post-independence. And in raising these debates, I propose to examine the trajectory of the challenges that these respective nations have faced over the last few decades. In a way, therefore, I'm looking at two parallel histories: the histories of the reception of these songs, as well as the history of the two nations post-independence. That is what this entire discussion is about. Now, the question of national identity seems to manifest itself progressively, even in this age of globalization and transnational movement. In fact, Michael Billing has pointed out that the nation is indicated or flagged in the lives of its citizenry almost on a very daily basis. And nationalism, far from being an intermittent mood in established nations, is the endemic condition. I make this point because I have in mind the debate between Richard Rorty and Martha Nussbaum, which took place in the early half of the 1990s and later on in the first decade of the 21st century, about the oppositions between cosmopolitanism and nationalism, and which would be a more dominant ideology, as it were. As it stands, nationalism is gaining more and more in power, and therefore the national anthem is also becoming more and more relevant. Described as a generally patriotic musical composition that evolves and eulogizes the history, traditions, and struggles of its people, and recognized by the nation's government, the national anthem therefore stands at the very center of this entire ideology of nationalism. And the flag and the anthem is described by Cerullo as modern totems. I've used this word earlier, that provide all identities, allegiances, and feelings of belonging. Please note that the national anthem, we do not sing the national anthem individually. It's sung as a body, thereby creating the sense of allegiance and feelings of belonging. Now, what do national anthems generally do? Before I move on to our national anthem and that of Bangladesh, let's quick look at what exactly do national anthems do across countries. It describes the constituents of the topography of a country very often, its religious identity. Take the Pakistani national anthem, for example. And very often, it talks about the ideological uniqueness as a nation. That's its defining its USP, as it were. And very often concludes with a call for victory and triumph of the nation. You remember the Star-Spangled Banner, for example, of the US talks about its notion of freedom and struggle, right? And announces the victory and the triumph of the nation. God Save the Queen is, of course, not really the national anthem of England. England does not really have a national anthem, but it is recognized and played on major occasions. And very often, the suitability of a musical score can be played to a band or an orchestra also determines the choice of a national anthem. You see, the national anthem has to be sung. Therefore, this quality of the musicality of the national anthem is also an important factor in its choice. And since the national anthem will transfer a message that is purposively and meticulously constructed, thereby, you see, because it's an ideological statement in many ways, challenges and debates about the national anthem raise considerable sentimental issues within a nation state. We have, for example, the national anthem of Canada, which has been revised in terms of new theories and ideologies which have come forth. The national anthem of Sri Lanka, incidentally, also underwent a change, but that is a history I'll come to by the by. Right. In case of post-colonial nations, the problems become more acute because the nation has to grapple, or the anthem has to grapple with colonial history and beyond, and has to figure out ways in which to respond to the birth of a nation, very often because the birth of these nations are very violent. So how does one, reconcile this violence and create a sense of unity within fragmented bodies of nations? Now, I want to make an interesting point here. You see, neither of these songs were written as national anthems per se, neither Shonar Bangla nor Jana Gana Mana. They were chosen as national anthems at pivotal moments in national history. Rabindranath had no idea that Shonar Bangla would become the national anthem of Bangladesh, although he had a fair idea, and he participated in the debate about a national song for India. Of course, the Jana Gana Mana was accepted as a national anthem well after he had passed away. We must also point out, and this is a point which I want to make with some importance, that these national anthems are fragments of larger songs. And for Jana Gana Mana, this is very important. It's just the first stanza of a larger song, but we will deal only with the parts that include the anthems as text, and some of it will spill over into the segments that were not taken within the national anthem. Obviously, the national anthem has a certain limitation in terms of time, therefore only part of a song can be had. Now, Jana Gana Mana, of course, adumbrates Rabindranath's idea of Bharat Tirtha. This is very simple. This is nothing which I'm making as a kind of a very innovative statement, but disparate identities can coexist in mutual respect with the possibility of negotiation and exchange. This was Rabindranath's idea. This was Gandhi's idea. This was Nehru's idea. The song that I'm referring to is Bharat Tirtha, of course, Hemor Chitta Punno Tirthe. And the operative line is Dibe ar nibe milabe milibe. You'll give and take, and we'll sort of all come together. And it talks about India as this great land of pilgrimage, Bharat Tirtha. Now, the sense of uniqueness, what Rabindranath is doing here also is that the sense of uniqueness of each region and the sense of belonging to an idea are etched simultaneously into the song. So there's these, different aspects of Bharatvarsho and the notion of Bharatvarsho, which are embedded into the song. That is its strength, and that has, also been its problem in certain ways. It is heavily topographical. The first stanza, please remember this. I'm not talking about Jana Gana Mana as the entire song, but the national anthem as such, and does not refer to any specific religion at all. That's very significant, thereby underscoring the secular identity of the nation state. Though this whole song does include the peaceful coexistence of nations. I will come to the whole song in a minute. So heavily topographical, does not refer to any specific religion at all, and thereby underscoring the secular identity of the nation state. And this is what the entire song looks like, the other four stanzas. Now, many of you are familiar with it. Many of you are not familiar with it. So let me just point out a few phrases which are very important for us. Udaro Bani, so this broad message. And you see, the second stanza, Tagore actually talks about India as being a land of many religions, Hindu, Buddha, Sikh, Jaino, Parashik, Musalman, Krishtani. He talks about the West and the East also. Purava Poshchimo Ashe, Tabo Singhasana Pashe. Now, very importantly, it talks therefore about Jana Gana Oikko Vidhata, the one who binds together. And then there's this entire debate which has been raised about the song as being sung for King George. Now, I am giving you the full song principally to point out how it could not have been so. When Tagore talks in the third stanza, actually, about the Jugo Jugo Dhabito Jatri, He Chiro Sharathi, Taboratho Chakre, Mukharito Pothodino Ratri. And therefore, he's talking about eternal time, as it were, time, the entire broad spectrum of Indian history. Therefore, it cannot be the English who formed just about 100 years or 200 years when Tagore was writing this song. And then he talks in the fourth stanza about the Snehomoyi Mata. You see, this is very important also. We have always thought about the dispenser of India's destiny as being somebody who's a man in terms of gender. But in Rabindranath's song, of course, it's actually the Mata who comes forth as the Bharata Bhagyabidbata. And therefore, in the final stanza, he talks about the collapse of a darkness, and the rise of a new dawn. You see, Nobo Jibona Roshe Dhale, Tobo Korunar Rage, Nidrito Bharata Jage. See, very interestingly, this song is not a song of benediction in many ways. It is also a deep song of protest against colonialism and a thought about an India that is rising in a new dawn of protest and independence. 1911, remember, is the date when the partition is actually being annulled, when the capital is moving from Calcutta to Delhi, and when King George is coming to Kolkata. At this point of time, Tagore is already at the forefront, although he has sort of withdrawn himself quite a bit, has been in the forefront of the anti-colonial movement. Right. Now, this issue about geography and identity within the national anthem is an aspect that Rabindranath himself talked about in 1927 in Javajatri Patro. And I think this is an interesting letter, which very few people have looked at. And Tagore talks about India as having deeply realized a geographical entity. And he says, we are now profuse in the use of the term national consciousness. But what kind of national consciousness can be there, devoid of actual geographical and ethnological realization? So Tagore is realizing that this diversity of India needs to be acknowledged somewhere within the proper body of a national song. Now, in that entire song, of course, I have pointed out to the reference to the Udaravani. That is why Jana Gana Mana is not merely a string of names. It's a strongly ideational song. It refers to the Udaravani, the harmonization of Purbo and Paschim. You see, that is where Rabindranath's cosmopolitanism comes in. He's not thinking merely, he acknowledges that the English have come like many other incursions and they have been absorbed into the body politic of the Indian identity. Therefore, there's this need for the harmonization of the Purbo and the Paschim, of modernity and our ancient culture. And then it talks about what I've already pointed out, the Oikko Vidhayako, Obichalo Mongolo, Kormo Rage. And it is this idea of India as a zone of unity and coexistence across history and identities. This is very important, that Rabindranath celebrates in the national anthem. It is therefore that we need to also always keep the unsung parts of the national anthem at the back of our mind when we are discussing any national anthem. Now, what were the debates about the national anthem? The first debates, of course, came right when Rabindranath wrote it and sung it for the very first time. Right. Subsequent to the announcement of the partition of Bengal, the Congress session in 1911 had decided to welcome the royal couple, George V, to Calcutta with a declaration of loyalty. Rabindranath was approached for the purpose. And this is a letter which very few people know about generally, but important to reiterate, Rabindranath was furious at this. When he was asked to sing a song in showing loyalty to the English nation, an English king, and he wrote to Pulin Bihari Sen, he said, "A friend influential in government circles had importuned me to compose a song in praise of the king. His request has amazed me, and the whole amazement was mingled with anger. So it was under the stress of this violent reaction that I proclaimed in Jana Gana Mana Odhinayako the victory of the dispenser of India's destiny, who chariots eternally the travelers through the ages." So I reiterate, this song was not a song of benediction merely. It was at that moment a song written in anger and protest. And he talks about the great charioteer of man's destiny in age after age could not by any means be George V or any other George. Even my loyal friend realized. And therefore, Tagore is saying that he literally threw out this friend and his request. In a later correspondence, this is 1939, he wrote about those who consider me capable of such unbounded stupidity. But then the question remains, how did this debate come across? Why did this debate arise? That's my next question. The problem seems to have been generated by the sequence of songs sung on this occasion. Jana Gana Mana was sung as an opening song. You see, a song of benediction, after which various resolutions welcoming the royal couple and expressing loyalty were passed, and then was followed by a Hindi song specifically sung for the purpose of praising the king. So when Tagore did not write this song, somebody else did, and it was a Hindi song which was sung for the occasion. The official Congress resolution of the 28th session specifically records Rabindranath's rendering of a patriotic song, after which a separate song of welcome was sung. So Rabindranath's was realized as a patriotic song, not a song of welcome. Very interestingly, the English and the Bengali press of the time read these songs very differently. And it is in this process of reading, that I find an interesting political dimension. The Amritobajar Potrika, for example, refers to Rabindranath's song of benediction, followed by another song in honor of the imperial majesty. Quite obviously, this is not Rabindranath's song. The Bengali, dated 28th December 1911, refers to the patriotic song composed by Babu Rabindranath, translated as King of the Heart of Nation, Lord of our country's fate. So even the Bengali was realizing it was a patriotic song. What about the English press? The English press put a different spin to it. The song was read as a song of welcome to the King Emperor, followed by another song in Hindi welcoming the imperial majesty. At the forefront of this was the Statesman, which read the song as a hymn of welcome to the king, specially composed for the occasion by Babu Rabindranath Tagore. And even Reuters reports a Bengali song specifically composed in honor of the royal visit. So there's a diametrically different dimension of the reporting of the two songs in the vernacular press, in the Indian press, as well, and the English press. Now the question is, was this a simple mistranslation generated by the sequence of events where attestations of loyalty were sandwiched between these two songs? So was this just an error of reporting? Or was this, and this is a much more, plausible explanation, a mischievous attempt to validate the king's visit by appropriating a song by arguably Bengal's most potent voice of protest. You see, 1911, Rabindranath is 50 actually, and he is probably the most well-known and vocal protesters for the cause of the anti-colonial struggle. We'll remember Shumit Sarkar writing that, Rabindranath was singing India into a nation at this point of time. Was translation, my question remains, being used then as a political tool to serve the imperial purpose? Right, so you see, the politics of the song is very, very interesting. But who is really this Bhagyabidbata? since we sing this song numerous times, almost every month, let's just take a look at who this Bhagyabidbata was and what Tagore had to say about her. Rabindranath chose to publish it in January 1912 under the title Bharata Bhagyabidbata in the Tattva-bodhini Patrika, under the official organ of the Adi Brahmo Samaj. And interestingly, this song goes right into the song as a Brahmo Sangeet. Later on, 25th January 1912, this song is sung at the Tagore household under Rabindranath's supervision. And Rabindranath uses the line, Jaya Jaya He Visheshwaro Manava Bhagyabidbata. So the Bharata Bhagyabidbata is changed into the Visheshwara Manava Bhagyabidbata. This interplay between the Visheshwar and the Manava Bhagyabidbata, these being Sanskrit terms, so I need not explain, clearly suggests the spiritual Lord who is at once immanent in his notion of Vishwabodh. You see, this spiritual one, the Brahma, and the moral cosmopolitanism. Rabindranath is talking about the Vishwabodh as this entire feeling of oneness that unifies all human beings. This moral cosmopolitanism, which he had outlined in his Shantiniketan addresses earlier. And in one of his Magotsav lectures, once again, Magotsav is that great Brahmo festival, Upasana, and in the space of worship, that he talks about the new era of religion in India and ends with the lines, may we stake our all and fearlessly join man's triumphal march towards the eternal. This is the eternal Brahma. Jaya 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 He Visheshwaro Manavo Bhagyabidbata. So it's interesting that for even Rabindranath, there is this movement between the Bharata Bhagyabidbata and the Visheshwaro Manava Bhagyabidbata. Right? So this interplay on this term throws very interesting light on how Rabindranath was trying in his own consciousness to juggle with the ideas of Bharatvarsho as part of this great civilizational concept of the universe. How the self, the nation, and the universe could be taken within certain concentric circles. And this remains very central to his idea of selfhood and cosmopolitanism. And therein lies this very interesting play on the Bhagyabidbata. How does this come across as an anthem? By 1917, the song was already seen as a song of protest and triumph of an Indian identity. It became one of the well-known songs. 1919, very interestingly, the song was translated by Tagore himself, and he translated this in a place called Madanapalli in Andhra Pradesh. And by 1937, James Cousins, the Irish associate of Tagore, was exhorting Indians to accept it as their national anthem. In fact, I have been to that Annie Besant Hall at Madanapalli where this song was put to tune by Cousins and his wife and sung in its modern rendition for the very first time. By 1942, Jana Gana Mana was accepted as an unifying song for India and had been chosen by the Azad Hind Fauj as India's national anthem. I was played at India's national anthem in the General Assembly of the United Nations in 1947 in New York, ratified as the national anthem in the Constituent Assembly of India on 24th January 1950. But herein lies another very interesting competition between two songs, because these were two songs which were being debated about which one would be the national anthem of India. And in the National Assembly, Dr. Rajendra Prasad, in fact, talked about Jana Gana Mana as the national anthem of India, subject, that is a very important line, subject to such alteration in the words as the government may authorize. So the national anthem can be changed, actually. The national anthem's lyrics can be changed. And the song Vande Mataram, which is now being mentioned, which has played a historic part in the struggle for Indian freedom, shall be honored equally with Jana Gana Mana and shall have equal status with it. So we actually have a national anthem and a national song in the form of Vande Mataram. The Vande Mataram was, of course, being debated at this point of time. You will remember that, of course, Rabindranath was one of the first people to sing it at a Congress session and thereby provide enormous popularity to it. Therefore, it is not that Tagore did not realize the genius of Vande Mataram, but when it came to a question of national identity and choice as a national song, he wrote to Nehru. And this is very interesting because I'm going to show you a picture of Tagore and Nehru. And many have talked about Nehru's debt to Gandhi, but we forget Nehru's debt to Tagore. And in many ways, Tagore was Nehru's, intellectual mentor, as it were. And you have this picture of Nehru listening with rapt attention to Rabindranath at Shantiniketan. And Tagore wrote to Nehru, 1937, he reads that Bankim's Vande Mataram, read together within its context, is liable to be interpreted in ways that might wound Muslim susceptibilities. Unfortunately, the two battle cries among the communities in the riots had used Vande Mataram and Allahu Akbar as slogans almost of religious identity formations. But Tagore added that a national song derived from it, consisting only of the first two stanzas of the original poem, need not remind us every time of the whole of it, much less of the story with which it was accidentally associated. And you remember the context of Anandamot, and the other stanzas of Vande Mataram, where you actually have a hostility embedded within it. Of course, this concept of the nation as a deity and a mother figure also offended and was not palatable to other communities at large. Vande Mataram and Nehru accepted this view, acknowledging the importance of this song as a symbol of Indian nationalism, but wrote to the Urdu poet that it contains too many difficult words and is out of context with India's secular credentials, right? Writing later on that the rest of this song, there is ideology, imagery, allegory, which people of various groups cannot put up with. And therefore pointing out to you how, there was this entire intellectual debate about what the song, the national anthem would mean for India, how the national anthem would bind different communities, and why Vande Mataram could not probably be chosen as a national anthem. At the same time, Vande Mataram was the rallying cry for the independence struggle. Therefore, you could not ignore it. And Vande Mataram had also brought people together. So there was this piquant situation where we actually chose a national anthem and we recognized Vande Mataram as a national song. And I think that, in certain ways, that is the magic of the Indian nation in its way of accommodating discordant, different voices within its large body politic, as it were, its capacity to absorb, its capacity to accommodate. I raise this debate to analyze the extent to which a national anthem can generate a sensitive and careful scrutiny of the ideological statement of the nation, a debate in which, Gandhi, Tagore, and Nehru were very, very robustly participating. The secular credentials of the Indian nation were and have been fundamental to its existence and sustainability. And Vande Mataram could probably have not fulfilled that requirement, right? You see, even in 2006, when, the Vande Mataram is being forced upon different people, Christians, Sikhs, of course, Muslims had also protested to clarify that singing had to be voluntary and not mandatory. Now, I'll just briefly touch upon the musical score, that for the national anthem to fire the imagination, its words have to be identified with. And very interestingly, Jana Gana Mana was written in Bangla, but it has a Sanskritized tone. Therefore, it has been accepted all across India very easily. And the musical score also needs to be accessible to the populace at large. In the case of Vande Mataram, both language and musical score could be difficult to identify with, to sing very popularly. Now, I'll come to the debates after independence. And there was this entire question about in 2005, in a petition that was filed by Sanjay Bhatnagar, who suggested that the word Sindhu should be deleted from the national anthem because there was no more Sindh in India, and that Kashmir should be, put in because the word had become redundant with the partition of India, the word Sindh. And there was Kumar Dipak Das, who thought that the national anthem was inadequate because it had completely neglected the Northeast, and argued that if the Indian government agrees to modify the national anthem, such measures can resolve the feeling of alienation. So you see, we are now moving from the religious identity politics to this entire question of regional identity, something which has plagued our national identity over the last 50 years or so. Therefore, how does one accommodate these regional aspirations within the national anthem? And that is not, I do not say that these are invalid arguments, but how does one change the national anthem to accommodate these demands, as it were? And the Supreme Court, interestingly, dismissed the petition, suggesting that the national anthem was a hymn or song expressing patriotic sentiments or feelings, and not a chronicle which defines the territory of a nation. Interestingly, Rabindranath had wanted to give an idea of the disparity of the nation, and the Supreme Court says, yes, we can do that, but we cannot accommodate everything. It's a sort of patriotic sentiments or expressions that is more important. What is very interesting is the Sindhi response. You see, interesting are these people who have been put on the margins, on the borders, as it were, and Sindh becomes, and the Sindhi people become these border people, as it were. And one of them argued that our language is gone, our culture is almost gone, and now we are in danger of losing our name. It's very interesting in the way that, the Supreme Court actually gave cognizance to the fact that, you see, even if the region was not there in India, the people were there. And therefore, they too had to be accommodated within the consciousness of the nation. And this is a point which was made by Sulil Khilnani. And I think that's a very interesting statement that he made, that every Indian should recognize the words of the national anthem as profound expressions of civilizational India. For Rabindranath, India was not merely a geographical expression, but an ideational one. And therefore, the question of literalism that the petitioners had put forward was, according to Sulil Khilnani, not very valid. But we cannot ignore this question also. At a time when regional identities demand our attention, and when, there have been cases where people have felt excluded, will there be a time when we'll have to accommodate these demands within the national anthem? That's a question which has both sides to it. Let me quickly make a few points before I move on to the Bangladesh national anthem, because I've already spent a lot of time on the Indian situation. How strongly national identity is linked with the national anthem. The senses of exclusion and inclusion can create bitter and disparate responses. And secondly, Jana Gana Mano's acceptance over the last years by all religious communities and regions have emphasized the enduring ideology of secularism and democracy of the nation state that has survived despite some major challenges. I do not know whether this state will remain or whether it will be challenged. My own idea is that it will remain, because our secularism, our concept of the nation state is much more enduring in that sense across civilizations. However, the debates around it have demonstrated the twin presences to Indian nationhood, the ruthless challenge of religious extremism, and the more complex issues of regional identities. So this has been the history of the song. and the history of the nation, going parallelly, one by one, side by side. Let me now take a quick detour and come to Sonar Bangla, the Bangladesh national anthem. Composed 1905, simultaneously appearing in Baul and Bango Darshan, the two journals that Rabindranath was writing, and of course in the book of poetry. The tune was inspired by a folk song, Ami Kothay Pabo Tare. This is a Baul song. The Bauls, I remind you, are, itinerant traveling sects who have accommodated both ideas of the Hindu and the Muslim religion, and therefore, like the Sufis, are people who bring people together, religions together. This is a song that Rabindranath had heard from Gagan Harkara in the early 1890s at Shilaidaho in Bangladesh. Therefore, the song was taken from a folk tune of Bangladesh, actually. It had become a rallying song in protest against British ploy to partition Bengal in 1905. So undivided India sung this song, undivided Bengal also sung this song against the partition, and therefore at the heart of Bengali identity in colonial India. So please remember this history, because this history is going to be very important in my discussion of this song. And it has also made its mark as a song of protest and valorizing the topography as salient and therefore to be worshipped. This is Sonar Bangla, the part that is once again the national anthem. There are of course other stanzas which I have not included. Sonar Bangla is also a longish song. But for people who do not know Bangla, this is Golden Bengal, Sonar Bangla. Ami tomaye bhalobashi is I love you. And he talks about, Rabindranath talks about the Akash, the sky, the Batash, the Banshi or the flute that is played, the Ritu of Falgun, and the fragrance of the flowers, and Oghran, and the plenitude of the crops in riverine Bengal. And he talks about the trees, the bot, banyan, the nodi, the rivers. And then he talks about the mother, the Bengali mother, whose words are like nectar. And then he says, and this is very interesting also, if your body becomes pale, I cry in grief. Now, this element of paleness, poverty, and grief is something which I'll come back to in a moment. The Akash Bata Shamer Bon Boter Mool Nodir Kul, of course, coalesce with melodious Bangla tune, very alive to Bengalis across the border rather, to create a topography that is resplendent with the identity of rural riverine Bengal. And remember, Bangladesh is a land of many rivers and water bodies, just like West Bengal is. And that therefore cuts across any religious divide. As Grino points out, the fervent attachment of Bengalis on both sides of Bengal to the distinct landscape of the region, and of course, with the water comes the fish. The song was a poetic celebration of the archetypal Bengali mentality. So for a nation which identified Bengaliness as its theme, Amar Sonar Bangla was a very potent song. Now, Amar Sonar Bangla had continued to be popular until the 1930s, and we're talking about undivided Bengal, when the more regional provincial identity, and this is when the debate about Pakistan is splitting Bengal, as it were, into two, swept up the overarching nationalist struggle. The creation of Pakistan and the subsequent denial of the economic rights to East Pakistan, erstwhile Bangladesh that is, had disillusioned Bangladeshis on the utopia of a specifically Muslim nationhood. So when Surawardi and the others, including Mujibur Rahman, had sort of voluntarily taken the identity of Pakistan, and the Pakistani state had unleashed tremendous brutality and an imperialism in terms of both the Khan Sena, as they were called, the soldiers, as well as culture, a kind of cultural Urdu imperialism. It is at this point of time that Amar Sonar Bangla becomes resurgent once again as a song of protest. So Urdu is imposed in 1948. The Bhasha Andolan then takes place, the language movement, and the surge for carrying of a nationalist identity that broke away from the religious moorings of a Pakistani nationalism to a linguistic nationalism. So we are looking at a movement from a kind of a communal identity, a religious mooring, to a linguistic identity predicating itself on Bengaliness. And Rabindranath becomes a catalyst for this, because in 1961, this is the poet's centenary, remember, rather, not the centenary, but the poet's birth anniversary celebrations of 1961, the Pakistani radio channels had almost boycotted Rabindra Sangeet, and therefore the group called Chayanot had actually engaged in singing Rabindra Sangeet all across East Pakistan. And 1961, therefore, marks the watershed moment when Rabindranath's birth centenary was not only being celebrated in rural Bangladesh, these songs were actually becoming songs of the subversion of the Pakistani state, of this Urdu imperialism, as it were. And therefore, Amar Shonar Bangla was being reinvented as an assertion of Bengali nationalism. This song was sung at public meetings of Mujibur Rahman and the broadcast on Shadin Banglar Betar Kendro, which was run from India, actually. It was therefore inevitable that it was chosen as the national anthem of Bangladesh in 1972, after the independence of the country. There were no other, debates. Amar Shonar Bangla was the rallying national anthem, and Joy Bangla was the rallying cry of Mujibur Rahman. Now, the problem remained, what would the ideology of the Bangladesh nation be? Now, the nationalist identity enshrined in the constitution of Bangladesh, and this is something which is very interesting to study, passed 4th November 1972, proclaims it as a secular democratic republic. Notice this very carefully, because Bangladesh, in its inception, was setting itself not as an Islamic state at all. It was projecting itself as a secular democratic republic. What were the 4 pillars? Nationalism, democracy, socialism, and secularism. And therefore, at its moment of inception, the identity of Bangladesh is predicated on a linguistic basis, and it carefully sought to segregate itself from the specifically Islamic identity of Pakistan. And in this case, Amar Shonar Bangla offered it a specific topographical identity. Not only is it only a song in Bengali, it was about Shonar Bangla, a sense of deep attachment to a region and language, and a secular embracing ideology. Additionally, the fact that it was drawn from a tune from the bowels of East Bengal might also have been a factor in its uncontested acceptance. We see the history of Bangladesh has been a history which has been, saturated in violence and contestation. And therefore, the identity of the state bred its own debates. How was the independent nation of Bangladesh going to carve out its identity vis-a-vis the people of neighboring West Bengal? So, the Bangladeshis were also Bengalis, and the Bengalis of West Bengal were also Bengalis. So, in this state of linguistic nationalism, how was Bangladesh to define itself separate from the Indian aspect of Bengaliness? If nationalism was to fall back upon an imaginary past, this is an important question, what past would it involve? At stake here, and this is very important also, is the originary moment for the nation. When did the nation emerge? You see, once again, for Rabindranath also, for Jana Gana Mana also, is the moment of independence the moment of our nation? Is India born only when we have a tryst with destiny in 1947 on the 15th of August? Was the idea of India born long ago? This is something which Rabindranath asks. But for Bangladesh, was the origin of Bangladesh in the linguistic movement of 1951? How was Bangladeshi nationalism to reconcile itself with Islamic identity, because Islamic identity remained a powerful identity in independent Bangladesh at that very moment. How did the nation change? 1979, secularism is deleted from the constitution. 1988, President Ershad amends the constitution to make Islam a state religion. However, in 2009, the deletion was deemed illegal, and this is when, Sheikh Hasina comes back to power. Of course, the idea of the Bangabandhu is still carried on, and Bangladesh reaffirms its secular identities. However, Islam continues to be a state religion, and the whole new concept of Islamic secularism seems to be gaining ground, drawing attention to the deep divisions within state policy. So much as the Bangladeshi state also projects its secularism, like India, of course, there are very many, divides and religious extremisms that it has to face. Right. Now, what was the debate about the nation? About the national anthem? We've seen the history of Bangladesh as a nation. How did the anthem sort of make its trajectory? In 2000, Professor Aftab Ahmed, a confidant of the BNP, this is, of course, Khalida Zia and her party, raises the issue arguing that the national anthem to be changed because Rabindranath was a Hindu poet, Indian Hindu poet, and promoted the idea of an undivided Bengal who could not speak for the modern Bangladeshi nation. Of course, this comment was met with great derision. But, Aftab Ahmed was not the only voice. It had already been raised by Abul Mansur Ahmad in 1944, who wrote that the Muslims of Bengal cannot be great by imitating Rabindranath. They will have to develop their own identity on the basis of their culture. And he says, never for a day in the sky of the world did the moon of Eid and Muharram appear. The joyous mother has come, of course. To make the moon appear, the task was left to Nazrul Islam. You see, Nazrul was progressively, being sort of constructed as this great Bangladeshi icon of poetic identity. And therefore, in 2001, the Chayanot Rabindra Sangeet performance was hounded. Anti-Tagore diatribe continued. There was this entire debate on the internet in a forum called Mukto Mona, which got some traction in Bangladesh. And it was written that give me a break, one who died in 1941 at 80 should still be regarded as the most relevant poet, essayist, novelist, and lyricist. And attempts have been made to create Nazrul Islam as the cultural icon of Bangladesh. But the problem is Nazrul himself was rigidly secular. And his deep affinity with Rabindranath has failed to create any significant fissure. Therefore, Rabindranath remains entrenched in Bangladeshi culture. Song still remains the national anthem, and Nazrul is recognized as a national poet. And the irony of it all is, and this is the magic of the subcontinent, as it were, despite our fissures and differences and religious identities, that the one song that that Nazrul wrote, which could have been the national anthem of Bangladesh, was Nomo 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 Bangladesh Momo, which in a certain way is even more Hindu than, or let's say, has evocations of the mother goddess even more than Rabindranath's song. You see, that's where the magic of Nazrul Islam also lies, in the identities. Despite the identities we've sought to ossify, the two poets created identities that would always have a crossover. Therefore, my point being, and I am talking for some time, I know, that the debates about Amar Shonar Bangla reveal the trajectory of the nation of Bangladesh and grappling with its own identity. And I'm quoting Schendel, who talks about the two versions of Bangladesh identity. One is the establishment nationalism drawn from Mujibur Rahman, that sees Bangladeshi identity as linguistic, secular, originating in 1952 with the Bhasha Andolon. The other sees it as the Islamic fundamentalist notion, Islam as the overriding basis of identity for Bangladesh, with its emphasis on the Arabic language, the Quran, highly dressed, gendered dress code, and the celebration of Islamic festivals. One of it, of course, is led by Sheikh Hasina, and the other is by Begum Khalida Zia. Now, this is also integrally related with the originary moment of and the imaginary homeland of the Bengalis, where for the Islamic nationalists, Bengali identity is overwhelmingly and essentially Muslim, sees the originary movement in the 1905 partition of Bengal, when the partition was made purely on religious grounds. For the more secular ones, it is a linguistic community and a cultural formation where Bauls, Rabindranath and Nazrul create a cultural history, and it's marked by secularism and a particular linguistic geographical nuance. These ideological fissures have not been resolved. They are still at the core of the nation as it grapples with the global conflict between secularism and religious extremism, between competing cosmopolitanisms and specific provincial identities. So what I've tried to do here is I've tried to see the history of the two national anthems and the trajectories of the two nations and the debates around the national anthem. Now, as an appendix, and this is something which very few of you are aware of, and I have been to Sri Lanka quite a number of times just to work on this fabulous poet, lyricist who wrote the Sri Lankan national anthem. 1934, Rabindranath travels to Ceylon with his troupe performing Shapmochon. This is one of those stills, very rare stills, which we have at the Rabindra Bhavan archives. You can see Shapmochon being performed here, and you can see Rabindranath on the stage, validating his own performance. And this was a magical moment when Sri Lankan cultural nationalism took root. And among the audience is a man called Anand Samarkoon. Now, Samarkoon is a Christian. Samarkoon is deeply Western, like many of his fellow Sri Lankan intellectuals. He chucks this Western ideas of culture, comes to India. And this is the moment when, Tagore changes Sri Lanka in a very profound way. 1939, he comes to Shantiniketan, studies music and art. 1940, he writes the song Namo Namo Matha. And you can see, if you look at the lyrics of the Sri Lankan national anthem, unfortunately, I've not put it out here because, otherwise this goes on for interminable hours. It has very many parallels with Rabindra Sangit. 1951, it is adopted as the national anthem of Sri Lanka. Both Sinhalese and Tamil versions are recognized and performed as national songs. You see, Sri Lanka too is riveted by these conflicts, the ethnic conflicts between the Sinhalese and the Tamils. So during 1951, both Sinhalese and Tamil versions are recognized and performed as national songs. 1960, it's a very interesting thing happens. You see, there are deaths of two successive prime ministers, and the Sri Lankans start wondering what is going wrong. Something really is evil. And what do they fix upon? They fix upon the national anthem, Namo Namo Matha. And they say that the Gana has na, mo, na. So it's a negative. Therefore, there's a need to change the national anthem. And it actually changes. 1961, Vikramasinghe, Bandaranaike actually changes the song. Samarkoon protests tremendously and in his depression commits suicide. So this is the first actual instance of a man who writes the national anthem and who commits suicide because the national anthem is changed contrary to his wishes. 2016, the Sirisena Vikramasinghe, this is a government which believes in reconciliation, allows singing the Tamil version also on public occasions in an attempt at ethnic reconciliation. 2020, as we're writing, an ultra-nationalist government of the Gotabaya Rajapakse of Gotabaya Rajapaksa scraps this policy. You see, Rajapaksa is the brother of the man who sort of decimated the Tamil tigers also, and committed a lot what has been called as genocide on the Sri Lankan Tamils, scraps this policy and says that this anthem is to be sung in Sinhalese only. And what is the example that they give? They say that look at India. Their song is sung only in Sanskrit despite they having many languages. Little does Rajapaksa know that the national anthem was actually not written in Sanskrit, but written in a regional language, Bangla. It was accepted, however, because it had a pan-Sanskrit sort of lyricism, which appealed to Indians at large. Right, this is the man whom we very rarely talk about, Anand Samarkoon, a fabulous lyricist and musician. Let me now conclude after this very, very long discussion. What my presentation has sought to bring out is how deeply nationalist identities are formed and encroach on a daily basis on our existence through symbols like the national flag and anthem, and how powerfully such debates interrogate our identities. Right, as I speak, this entire question about whether we should stand when the national anthem is being played in cinema halls is raging across a lot of states. The subcontinent as a whole today is saturated by a plethora of discourses of identity, pushing the nation states to its limits. And it's true not only of India, but Bangladesh and Sri Lanka as well. For Rabindranath, individual identities were important, but he envisaged a harmonious coexistence and interactions of identities. I just wonder what Rabindranath would have to say about the debates facing the respective nations. And I think he would have been pretty amused to see, or not amused, probably pained to see, that his songs, which were chosen as national anthems, were mired in such debates about identity politics and religious extremism in general. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is the crux of my talk. The progressive history of the two national anthems, and that is read in conjunction with the histories of the two, rather three nations. Thank you for a very patient hearing, and I'd be welcoming your views and your opinions and your questions. Of course, if we do not finish during the question and answer session, you can write to me. My email address is given here. Thank you very much. I'm done.
Sir, there are two questions from the attendees. How do you see the future of the anthems?
Well, you see, in terms of India, I think the Jana Gana Mana has been accepted by and large by the people. But there might be occasions, you see, when, and this is true, that there are parts of India which have not been represented in the national anthem. So as regional identities deepen, there might be situations where the government might have to take a call, although I would not personally be in favor of that. But remember, I am a Bengali, so I cannot speak in that sense for communities which are marginalized. The Northeast has a very strong case in the way in which, various societies, parts of India marginalize them. So maybe including them within the national anthem would give them a sense of belonging. I don't know about Kashmir. Maybe sometime later on that too might happen. You see, that is where the government of India and the founding fathers of our constitution had probably anticipated these issues and kept a little bit of a leeway. With Bangladesh, I will be very circumspect, because you see, Bangladesh, with the change in government in Bangladesh, there might be very many debates about the national anthem once again. But the fact remains that these have endured as songs, have fired people, and once national anthems are, have taken root, it is very difficult to change them or to amend them very considerably. So I think they will remain. What is the other question?
Okay. What role do these anthems play in building contemporary national consciousness?
Right. You see, any national anthem sung publicly, collectively, reiterate and remind us of our allegiance to the nation. And they keep on, they are factors, especially in a diverse country like India, of reiterating our commitment to the nation, our identification with the nation, our bonding with the nation. But you see, we have to be very carefully aware that, nationalism is not thrust upon us like that. Nationalism is something which should be ingrained within our hearts. Our love for our country should be something which comes naturally rather than, being thrust upon us. However, having said that, you see, I would say that the singing of the national anthem binds India together and brings different communities, different people together. So there is a role, I acknowledge, and there's a very powerful role that the national anthem has upon the psyche of the people.
Okay, sir. Thank you. Sir, there is a question from Himadri Datta. Okay.
Yeah.
Please enlighten a bit about the Azad Hind Fauj anthem and how and why it was changed a bit from the Tagore version.
Right, it was changed largely because most of the soldiers would understand the Hindi version of it. And secondly, for Subhash Bose, the song had to be given a particularly martial kind of an outlook. Therefore, in terms of the beat of the song, in terms of the language of the song, it had to be changed to a certain extent. It had to be acceptable to, and you remember that most of these soldiers were earlier soldiers of the British Army who were captured by the Japanese and handed over to Subhash Bose. So they had to be given a song which could quickly be memorized and which would act as not only a song of nation, but also a song of its military. And that is where you see every military has its own set of songs. In the Indian military, the Azad Hind Fauj, of course, had to quickly, generate its own set of lyrics, and therefore I think the national anthem or Jana Gana Mana underwent a slight change.
Wait a minute. Sir, there is a question from Dr. Brijesh Gupta. If the Bangladeshi people change their present government, then what is the future of present national anthem according to you?
As I pointed out, you see, we have seen that the national anthem endured during the reign of Ershad, and there were, several times when the Khalida Zia government actually took office. So, it is, to change a national anthem is very difficult because, it has been accepted by the people by and large, although I would not say that it has not happened. But once again, Tagore's song has this magic. Amar Sonar Bangla has this magic in the sense that it talks not about any identity of any religious or any other identity, but the identity of a Bengali way of living. Therefore, to displace it would be difficult. And as I said, until and unless Bangladesh moves to a very radical Islamization, I don't think the Sonar Bangla will be disturbed. However, given that, if there is a very radical movement towards fundamentalism, then I don't know. Then, this entire question about Rabindranath being Indian poet, Hindu poet could surface. But you see, as I said, interestingly, Nazrul who is the national poet of Bangladesh, even his songs talk about the secular fabric of the nation. So to displace him and the national anthem would be very, very difficult.
Okay, we have with us Ritam Sadhu. Are you there?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Okay, ask your question.
Amrita, thank you for such a
You
fascinating
can stop
presentation.
your video and ask your question, no problem.
Yes, yes. Thank you, Amrita, for such a fascinating presentation.
Thank you.
Uh, you were saying that Rabindranath had expressed his reservations to Nehru regarding Vande Mataram, regarding making Vande Mataram as the national song. So, was there, do you see kind of a covert wish on the part of Rabindranath to make, to project his song as the song for the nation?
Well, that is being a little unkind to Rabindranath, I think. You know, you see, the point remained that both Tagore and Nehru, I think, were above merely personal opinions. And you see, let me clarify this a bit. You know, the debate about the national song actually was being very vocally argued by a non-Indian as such, and this was James Cousins. It was Cousins who was projecting this song to be India's national anthem or India's national song. Now, you see, what was the problem is that, and you might take a look at Shobboshachi Bhattacharya's very fascinating book titled Vande Mataram, the biography of a song. It's a small little book, but I think which every one of us should read. You see, the problem was gradually becoming that, you know, in riots across the country, Vande Mataram was being used as a kind of a slogan, as a communal slogan. Secondly, what was happening was that Jana had specifically started raising objections about the song as being a song of India, especially now this is very interesting also because in the earlier half of the freedom struggle, Vande Mataram's Hindu dimensions were never really very important. It was sung as a song of togetherness both by Hindus and Muslims in their opposition to British colonial rule. It was only when, you know, this question of Pakistan came along and there were very important fissures within the Congress that these problems started resurfacing. You see, Rabindranath also had this very, very intense reading of the Anandamot, which incidentally Nehru also had, and they realized that, you know, should that song be imposed upon the nation, then it could not be taken out of context. It would also always be read with Anandamot. It would also be read with the other stanzas. It would also be read in terms of its projection of the mother goddess, and therefore would probably not be acceptable to the people at large. You know, therefore I would say that they were thinking about the nation rather than, you know, thinking about Jana Gana Mana. By that time, I think Rabindranath was beyond just being recognized as the author of the national anthem. You know, he was already conscious about his recognition as Gurudev for posterity, right?
Thank you, Amrita.
I think one of your students wants to know, sir, why was Jana Gana Mana chosen as the national anthem?
Well, I've talked at length about this, so yes. I think he will have to go back to the recording to find it.
Yes, yeah. Okay. I think we are done with the questions, sir. Sir, can you click on Q&A box?
Right. Okay. Just let me take a quick look. I think
Last question.
There's a question on, are there any views of Mahashwata Devi on the national anthem? I'm not really aware of this, so I'll have to check and let you know. There's this question which I've already answered, if the Bangladeshi people change their present government. That I've already answered. What is the difference between national anthem and the national song? The national anthem, interestingly, that national song was played across all India radio, all across the 1950s, 60s, 70s. The national anthem, remember, is a song which is only to be sung on formal occasions. The national anthem cannot be sung in its distorted versions. It has to be sung. It represents the nation in all international forum, and it is a 52-second song. Therefore, the national anthem is much more official than the national song, which is an articulation of the people's wishes in many ways. So its formality is probably its distinctive feature, Zulfikar. That's the question you asked. Thank you. I think we are through with most of the questions.
Yes, sir. Yes, yes. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Amrit Sen, sir, Professor and Head Department of English at Vishwabharati Sankeenitan, for your thought-provoking, informative, insightful, and interactive session on of identities and national anthems, the case of Rabindranath Tagore. We thoroughly enjoyed and learned a lot from you, sir. Thank you very much, one and all, for your active participation by logging Zoom room, which is full throughout the session, and those who are watching on YouTube channel as per their own time and reaching every live video has more than 700 to 1,500 views within 24 hours. Thank you very much for making this lecture series a grand success. Langdit lecture series believes in the philosophy sharing is caring, to learn from each other and grow together. So stay at home, stay safe. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, and good night to everybody who's listened. Thank you for making this possible.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.